Once upon a time, there was an African Sulcata tortoise, but he didn't live in Africa. He lived in Laramie, Wyoming with his person, Diane. And she adopted him as a rescue because he had been confiscated in a drug bust and he needed a good home. And so she brought him home, and he was a little boy then, no bigger than a teacup. And so she brought him home, she built him a habitat, she researched his food, she saw the different things that were going to make him healthy and happy. And so then they started their life together, and she brought him hay because that was his food, and cactus because that was an acceptable food, and dandelions because that was all on the list. So one day Dean got sick, and she took him to the vet, and he said, "Oh no, he's having too much protein. See this pyramiding on his shell?" And Diane was shocked because she said, "I'm not giving him protein. I'm giving him hay and cactus and dandelions." And the doctor said, "Oh, dandelions, that's the junk food of tortoises." And she said, "But it was on the list." And he said, "Well, he should only have a little." Well, then Diane thought of how he loved dandelions, and she loved to make him happy. So she brought him more and more and more dandelions. So he wasn't having dandelions in moderation. He was having them kind of as his primary diet. Oh, this was devastating news because not only was his shell pyramiding, but pyramiding is a permanent deformity of a sulcata tortoise. So she immediately stopped feeding him that diet. But the damage was done. It stopped getting worse, but as he grew, the pyramids grew. And every time she looked at his shell, she would be reminded of the mistake she had made and carried for him. When people would come to see him, because people do like to see him because he's so interesting and sociable, they would say, "Oh, how beautiful his shell is. I love the way it does that." And they would notice the pyramids, but they didn't know about sulcata tortoises. And so she would say, "Oh, yes," but inside she would feel ashamed. And so over the years, and Dean is now 22 years old, his shell has been a source of Diane's shame, silently inside to herself. But one day, last week, she was out with Dean in the yard, and he came up to her, and she bent down, and she pet his shell and rubbed on it, and he loved that so much. He just stayed and felt the touch. And she felt the ripple of the pyramids. And the shame started to come up. And then the sun came out and lit up the pyramids like she was in Egypt, seeing the sun on the giant pyramids there. And she said, "How beautiful they are. You have formed these beautiful pyramids out of my error." And then inside her came another thought of the pyramids she has in her own life, the things that have been formed by mistakes that were made by her and maybe by her parents or by people who hurt her and wounded her. And she thought, my pyramids are beautiful too. So that was what Dean, with his beautiful pyramids, taught Diane.